G'day there. You're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I've got what I would probably call a Revit masterclass. It's a bit of a longer video than my usual ones, but today I'm focusing on what we would call blocking and stacking, often a very early planning technique where we're trying to figure out the area that we can achieve in a project whilst using fairly simple and quick techniques that are flexible to change. I'm going to explore a few options you can use here, sort of working from the most rudimentary ones up to the more complex and sophisticated ones. So we'll firstly look at a 2D based workflow using detail items, and we'll look at how you can use key schedules to inject some information into them. From there, I'll look at using massing and why I don't typically use massing in Revit. There are a few limitations that make it quite hard to work with different options for. And then we'll look at a fairly intelligent option using ceilings. So this is actually my preferred method. It is quite different, but I found that it's the one that works the best when you set up a template to deliver in this way. So without further ado, I'm going to be using Revit 2022. I'm not really going to be using too many features unique to this version, but it does have some more advanced scheduling methods. So you can do things like filter by type name, which isn't something you can do in earlier builds. So there might be a couple of unique features I use here and there. But otherwise, most of these things are doable in any version of Revit. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get started. We're going to start with sort of the less intelligent options first, and then work our way up to the more intelligent / automatic options you can use to develop massing and planning studies. So to begin with, we're going to look at a 2D option, which is why it's the least intelligent, but for some people it might be the easiest one. So what we're going to need to do is make a family. I'm going to make, in this case, a detail item family. And we're just going to build a box in this case. Now you could make this thing more intelligent if you wanted to. You could add things like notches and corners, balconies if you're doing apartments. But in this case, I'm just going to create a reference plane and another reference plane. And I'm just going to rename this to left. And then I'm going to call this front and back and right, just to establish the four sides of my family. And all this family is going to contain is a field region. You can pick a special border style if you want for these, depending on how you want it to look graphically. But in this case, I'm just going to align the sketch. And finally, I'm also going to add 2 dimensions. I'm just going to make this a solid fill as well. And I'll just give it a plain color for now. For now, I'm just going to make it white. So I'm just going to switch this style to white. And you're going to want to make these 2 dimensions parametric, so we are going to associate a parameter or a label to this parameter. I'm going to make this a shared parameter in this case, so I am going to browse to my shared parameter file, just so I can actually make these intelligent parameters that we could schedule if we needed to. So you'll need in this case just some shared parameters like width, depth, area. In my case, I'm going to be firstly using a length parameter, and I'm just going to use my dedicated depth parameter. I'm going to make it instance based, and then I'm also going to do the same for the width. And at this point, we should have a parametric planning block that we could place in 2D. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, maybe just 5 by 5, just to make it a little bit closer to what an actual planning block would be in size. What I'm also going to do is go to its type properties, and I'm going to add a shared parameter of the type area. So in this case, I'm just going to find an area parameter, and I'm just going to assign that as well. And I'm going to associate a formula to this. So I'm going to make this formula width times depth. And this will automatically calculate the area of my planning block as I move it around. To begin with, I'm just going to call this apartment. And I'm just going to finish that. I'm just going to do a quick purge just to get rid of the things that I'm not using. And I'm going to make a new project. And I'm not going to use a template in this case. I'll just use the architectural Autodesk template, which is nothing special. I'm just going to save this family. And I'll just call this 2D planning block. I'm going to load this down into the model. And at this point, I have a flexible planning block that also reports its area. So let's say that maybe our apartment is, 10 by 8. Obviously not a great apartment size. Loading at the moment, I'm also just working in a plan. So I'm going to make a few of these. Maybe I want to make a row of them. And I'm not really a planner, so don't judge my planning ability. I'm going to mirror them across the corridor. And I'm just going to move those by a corridor. And let's say that we have a stair core in here. Now obviously that's a massive, a massive stair core. For now, I'll just call this core. And I'm also going to make a corridor. And I'm going to call that corridor. So what we can do is develop some filters which can override the colors of these elements. So I'm going to make a new filter, and I'll just call this 2D corridor. Apply it to detail items, and I'm going to say in this case the type name is equal to corridor. I'm then going to duplicate that, and of course, as you can guess, we're just going to make one for the core, and we're also going to make one for the apartments. And we can use these to override the appearance of particular planning blocks without having to add extra field regions to our families. So in this particular view's properties, I can add these 3 filters, and I can just change their surface pattern colors. So maybe apartments are yellow. In this case, I might also just make sure it's solid. Core, we'll make a dark gray. And corridor, sorry, that's actually meant to be gray. So I'll make that a light gray. And I'll make our apartments just like an off yellow. And we can see now that we can actually just parametrically override not parametrically, intelligently override these as we work with them. So if I make another apartment, the filter is going to pick it up. And from here, because we've added shared parameters to these, we can actually schedule them as well. So in this case, I'm going to make a new schedule, and I'm going to schedule detail items. And in this case, we're going to want to schedule a few things. First of all, we're going to want to schedule probably our type, which describes what the object is. From there, we're also going to want to schedule the area of the element. And that's probably all for now. And we can see now that these areas are reportable. We can also do things like maybe add a count to see how many things we have. And I can also say to sort by type and then de-itemize. Take my area and calculate totals. And I can also schedule the number of apartments, core and corridor spaces I have, and also do an area tally as well. Now, of course, we're only doing one level at the moment. There are different ways which you could generate, I guess, multi-level buildings. Be aware that, I guess, in this case, if you do copy these to another view, it's sort of going to treat them like another level. At the moment, we obviously don't have those view properties that override them, but we can see now that we've effectively doubled. So what you might want to do, if you do work with multiple levels, is give them something like a comment that tells them what level they belong to. Now, we're obviously, working very unintelligently here. If I go to 3D, I'm not going to see anything. But what we could do now is add the comments and make it a hidden field, but add it as a header. So I'm going to firstly say comments as a header, add a blank line, and then go by type. And you can see that you can also break them up by level. We can also add either subtotals. So we could add a footer with totals, and we could also add a grand total. To see the total area that we're using, combined in this case also with each level's subtotal as well. We could go one step further on top of that by applying rates to determine the efficiency of GFA that these generate, or gross floor area. So in this case, I'm going to make a schedule under detail items, and I'm going to make it a key schedule. And I'm going to say in this case, this is the area efficiency. And that's going to be the name of the key value that we're using to determine other values. So in this case, I'm going to firstly probably need another parameter for these, which is going to be their GFA area. But all we're really going to be doing here is controlling one parameter using the key name. So I'll need to add a project parameter. And in this case, I'm going to call this the GF, or I'll call this the efficiency rate. It's going to be, in this case, a number. So number, And we're going to be essentially setting keys for this. So we're going to need to add keys to our key schedule. I'm going to insert some rows, and in this case, let's call this apartment. Let's call this circulation and core. And in this case, our GFA efficiency, or I guess our yield, in this case on apartments, is maybe something like 80%. So I'm going to make this number 0.8. Circulation and core, I'm going to make 0 in this case, because they don't have any associated sellable area. So I guess instead of GFA, I'm looking more at NLA at this point. You could do different sort of efficiencies for GFA. So for example, if you were doing GFA, your circulation would contribute towards that to some degree. But what we can do now back in our main schedule is, actually we probably need to assign the keys first. So I'm going to take my apartments, and now I have this key value available. I can call them apartments, and in this case, notice that the efficiency rate has updated because it's connected at the key schedule level. Likewise, I can come here and associate my keys here as well. I can find any others that I've set up and do the same thing. Now back in our schedule, we can introduce a few things. So first of all, we're going to want to add that efficiency rate, which now we can see is available. We're going to want to then add a calculated field. So I'm going to add a calculated field to the schedule, and I'm going to call this NLA, or the net leasable area. I'm going to make it an area parameter, and for its formula, I'm going to do area times rate. I'm just going to put that right after efficiency rate, and then I'm also going to tell my NLA to calculate totals. And you can see now that the areas are adjusting to suit the NLA calculation based on the efficiency, which is tied to the key, which is then associated to the element. So this technique is really applicable to nearly any other workflow I'm going to show you. I might show you in the context of maybe one other workflow we use, but we're going to use about 2 or 3 other solutions here to generate space planning solutions. So what I'm also going to show you quickly is massing. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just delete, I'll keep level 1, but I'll put it up to maybe 6 meters for a podium floor. And then I'm just going to start making a few extra floors. Might go to an elevation. Actually, I need to create one, because we're just going to make some more floors. Now, the reason why massing is a little bit challenging is because you're sort of depending on levels to generate your outcome. And sometimes mass floors can be a little bit problematic when you have different options with different floor to floors, because you end up managing multiple sets of levels at the same time, which isn't really ideal. As well as this, I guess in this case, if we create a new design option, we could add them to design options, but again, that gets quite complex in itself. And I think actually, yes, we can't actually move levels to design options anyway. We can move grids, but not levels. So in this case, you really do end up with quite a messy model once you're looking at different floor-to-floor variations. So I do usually err away from massing at some point. So in this case, I'll just add another floor just at 3 meters, and I'll just maybe make a few more. I could use the array tool. I guess that probably would have been a smarter idea. But for now, let's just do that many levels. So what I'm going to do is just set up a basic feasibility mass. And I'm going to make this just a little, maybe a little bit wider. I might need to go into cross section just to change the level extents. And I'm just going to make the 3D extents a little bit bigger. There we go. So what I'm going to do is go to component, model in place, and I'm just going to make a mass in place. Revit's going to enable the show mass mode, and I'm just going to call this option A. I'm going to just draw some model lines initially, and I'm going to set my work plane to ground. And let's just model a rough podium shape. We can always finesse the size of it if we need to by tab selecting edges, and you can type in specific dimensions. Usually you'd probably use something like a property boundary to generate this part of the building. But when you've generated those edges, you just have to go to create form. Now you can always make these reference lines if you want to, and then create form instead. And the reason why you might want to do that is because then you have the ability to post edit. So in this case, if I can isolate that edge, notice I have the ability to muck around with my shape to some degree still. What I'm going to do is use my align tool, and I'm going to align and lock in this case. Now the reason why I've locked it is so if these move, my mass moves with them as well. It's one of the few scenarios I actually constrain elements in the model environment. I'm now just going to set my work plane to the first level of my tower, draw a tower form, switch over to reference lines and create a form again. And this time I'm going to wait until I get to the top, and then I'm just going to lock that face and lock that face. And now if I move this level, my tower moves with it as well. So you might actually want to make this your top of tower level. That way if you add more levels in between, you can just keep your top of tower consistent and always use that to move your tower itself. At this point we're going to create mass floors. So if I select my mass, I can use the mass floors tool. In this case to pick my relevant levels that are generating mass floors. So level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will all generate a mass floor. Now at this point, some of these floors really should be used for different things. So we do have this usage parameter, which you could use if you wanted to. I usually prefer to typically use a key schedule again, which I'll show you quickly. So if I go to View, Schedules, and I go to Mass Floors, I can again make another efficiency type. And in this case, I can probably add just another efficiency parameter, but I could go and expand the categories that my original project parameter relates to instead. But for now, I'm just going to make that a number parameter, add it again. And now we can just set up a couple of efficiency types. In this case, I'll just say podium and tower. Let's say my tower is going to be high yield residential, so maybe it's 0.85, and my podium is 0.6. It's not high yield. And this is maybe just going to be a gross floor area calculation. So at this point, I can then take my mass floors, take their efficiency keys, and I can just isolate category and apply them to suit. Again, we can create another schedule like we did with our detail items. But this time we're scheduling mass floors, and we're going to add just a few different things. So we could add level, we could add area, which in this case is, I think, floor area. And we'll also add, in this case, our efficiency type. And we might add that before, because that's sort of like the class that the mass floor is. And then we can also, in this case, add our efficiency rate. And likewise, again, we're going to add a calculated field. And I'll just call this GFA for gross floor area, add an area field. And in this case, we do floor area times mass efficiency. We're going to sort and group, in this case, firstly by, probably just by efficiency type in this case. We don't really need a footer, but we will do a grand total. We're going to keep itemize on because we want to see every level. So we're then going to sort by level. And then under formatting, I think the only things we need to do is calculate total on our areas. And there we go. We can see that we've got a floor by floor tally of what a floor is, what its area is. You can show or hide the mass floor efficiency. It's up to you. And in this case, we can see our total gross floor area calculation as well. So it's really handy when you're doing a super simple massing exercise. And if you don't have, in this case, too many options with different floor-to-floor heights to manage. But once you do have different floor-to-floor heights, it can get quite complicated because, like you saw, you do have to tell mass floors which levels they use. So different options would lead to maybe different sets of levels. It can get really, really messy. You can use work sets to hide sets of levels or filters, but it's still incredibly messy. So often an approach that I like to use is instead using ceilings, which are a bit of a strange approach. But they do sort of get the job done. So I'm going to go to level 0. And what I might do is just move my mass to the side. And I'm going to make a new ceiling. And the good thing about ceilings is when you draw them, they go up from the plane you draw them at. So in this case, I'm going to sketch a ceiling. And I'm just, in this case, maybe I'll just do my previous option, my podium. And just move off to the side. I'm going to offset it by 0. And in this case, I'm just going to make it podium, and I'm going to put in the height of it as well. podium 6 meters. In this case, I'm just going to delete all but one layer inside the ceiling and make its thickness its floor-to-floor height. I might also create a material which I can use for this element as well. So in this case, I'm just going to call this podium. And what I'm going to do is just give it a 3D surface color. And we'll just say the podium is maybe green. Now what that's done is created a ceiling which looks a little bit like that. And what I might also do is just update that material's appearance as well. Just so when it's in realistic mode, it's the right color as well. And once we update that, we should hopefully see a green ceiling, which is actually going to look more like a stackable mass. For some reason, Revit is freezing up at the moment and is gone. Screw you, Revit. Yeah, that happens sometimes, great. Always nice to expose Revit's weaknesses. But so in this case, I'm just going to quickly return back in and just basically set that little step up again. As you can see, very occasionally Revit will let us down. It's a shame too, because I was going to use that file as an example for people to look at. What a bummer. I'm not going to take this out of the edit, because I like to expose when programs don't work, so that it's more obvious that they're not perfect. So probably cut forward about a minute, and we'll be back at the point we're at before. Tut, Revit. I think I work a little bit too fast for Revit sometimes to keep up. Great, okay. Alright, so making a new project again. I'll make that ceiling again. I'll just make the levels very quickly. So level 1, I'll move up to 6 meters. This time I'm just going to keep the levels at the same point, and I'm just going to do an array. This time I'm going to be really lazy. I'm going to move to second. I'll make 10 of them. There we go. You can always keep this array parametric if you want to, so that you can just add more levels on the fly. I believe if you take away levels and then add them back, notice that the level name gets confused. So you will want to be careful with that behavior, that you don't sort of undo and re-add the levels, because it does take up those names, unfortunately. So we're going to go back to level 0. I'm going to make a new ceiling, sketch its type. For now, I'm just going to make it very simple. Okay, I'm going to go back to its structure, 3000, and see if I can have Revit keep up with me this time. I find the material browser highly unstable. It crashes me out a lot in Revit. It's definitely one of my least favorite features in Revit when it comes to stability. Okay, green. So I'm going pretty fast here, but all I'm doing is just creating a green material in principle. While I'm here, I'm also just going to make another material, which is just going to be apartment. Now I don't want to do that because I've already made an asset, so I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to duplicate it. There we go. Apartments can be yellow. And I might want to also add a cut pattern to them as well, so that when they get cut through, they also show that color. This one will be green. Just want to make sure that's updated. Yep, great. And then finally, we'll just we'll call this just core or general space. So these would be like corridors and cores. And the good thing about using ceilings is that you can use sketch boundaries, so they're much more flexible in terms of how you lay them out. You don't have to lock yourself down to like a box like that filled region, because of course you could make a family like a generic model that behaves very similarly to that detail item box that we made. But at this point I have 3 materials available. This time we don't crash. Okay, great. So we're going to do podium, 6 meters, make that a 6 meter high ceiling. And then we're going to need to put that ceiling at the level, at 0. I'm going to go above this now to level 1. Now it's good to use an underlay, so in this case I'm actually underlaying level 0 so I can see the extent of my podium. But now I can just model more ceilings. And in this case, I might just model up some apartments. So I'm going to model a 3-meter apartment. 3 meters. And I'll just model up some generic blocks for now. Nothing special. And of course, ceilings generate an area. So in this case, we're going to technically get an area out of this as well. So I'll just make a corridor. In this case, I'll make it 1800, and maybe there's going to be a little vestibule like that for my core. A very small core in this case. Of course, it's probably not very feasible, but we're just going to work ahead anyway. And this one's going to be my core 3 meters. You could, of course, break your core into a corridor and also into a stair if you wanted to, but we're just going to keep things simple for now. And maybe these apartments are slightly bigger, and they might wrap behind the core as well. It's working pretty loosely. And in 3D, we can see we're starting to create something that is much more feasible. Now, one challenge with ceilings, as you can see, is the edges are typically just showing up generically. So that is one sort of shortfall, I guess, that this workflow seems to exhibit. For some reason, they don't show up projected on the side, which is a little bit strange. I guess a shortfall of using ceilings. So if you're doing a 3D perspective of it, it may not necessarily give you what you want, because when I go to consistent colors or realistic, you can see it's just rendering out as, well, in this case, when you're working in a realistic mode, it seems to work. So maybe we could do that. But what we can do with a typical floor is group it. And then we can just simply copy this to other levels. So in this case, this one sits on level 1. Let's put it on 2 to 12. And there we go. We now have a typical tower masked up using ceilings. Again, we can generate a new parameter for efficiency. So this time we're going to apply this parameter to ceilings. And we're going to make it a schedule key. We'll just call this efficiency. Now, I believe it's an instance-based parameter, which isn't necessarily ideal. So rather than make a key, maybe we can add a project parameter, but I'll show you both options anyway. So in this case, we can have key name, and we can add a parameter, but it has to be instance-based. So it's not really ideal, but we could call this rate instance-based. Add a number. And the main time you might want to use this is if you want to apply different rates to the same class of apartment, because maybe you have high and low yield, but you'd probably want to make those two different ceiling types anyway. But the same as before, we could add keys in that way. So we could say 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. And we could say high, low, and medium. So they could be like your sub-yield for apartments. And then we could also apply a rate as a project parameter to ceilings. So in this case, I'm going to say efficiency as a type parameter. We're going to make it a number-based parameter applied to ceilings. And because we made it the type parameter, we can apply this to our ceiling type. So in the type properties, we're just going to find that parameter. And let's say this is like our GFA. Let's say our podium is 0.7. And our apartment, which I might modify from outside the group. Let's say this is a 0.85. And our corridor is in this case going to be maybe 0.7. Now we can make a ceiling schedule instead. And in this case, we're going to need a few things. First of all, we'll need our type name. Remember, our type name does have the height of it in there, so you may wish to maybe use description or something like that instead and populate the description with a different field. But I think having the height in there is good because it makes the user more aware of that parameter. We're going to add their area, and we're also going to add their efficiency. Now, we have 2 efficiencies at the moment, so what I might do is just go and delete that ceiling style schedule, so that we only have one efficiency parameter to pick from, because we do have that instance-based and also type-based parameter, but I've just got rid of that instance-based schedule key. So we've got our efficiency, we've got a calculated field. In this case, this is going to be maybe GFA. We make this area, and we just say this is area times efficiency. In this case, you might want to add count as well. In this case, we can filter. In this case, we don't really need to filter. So first of all, we're going to sort by level actually. So what we might do is go and add in our level. And let's sort by level. We'll make it a header with a footer, with a subtotal, a blank line, a grand total with total areas, and we won't itemize every instance. You could itemize if you wanted to show apartment numbers, if you wanted to give each of these like a mark, but in this case, probably a bit of overkill. For formatting, I'll just go and enable totals for GFA and also totals for area. And at this point, I probably do need to sort by type as well. There we go. And we can have a look at all of our apartment and core subtotals on each level. We could also disable or re-enable itemize every instance to see each apartment on each floor. We could always just disable the level filter. So we'll just say none for level, and then we'll sort by type. Turn off itemize every instance, and now we can just see the total of area per type of unit, so we can see how much GFA of apartments we have, and we can do our total as well. So that's another option as well, but you could also use a 3D generic model family. The only limitation is that you'd be dealing with a more limited sketch profile, because you need to make it something consistent, like our detail item, such as a box, and any other features you need to build into it. Whereas using ceilings, you've got pretty flexible control of this, and the model group feature really easily enables us to sort of work independently of levels. So you could create more design options using this method as well, without thinking as hard about having to use Revit levels as well. The good thing about this method that I like as well is that it works well for blocking and stacking diagrams. So if I do a section through my building, I have a blocking and stacking diagram. Now I think I am going to struggle to get the colors that I want. That is one limitation that does come of this. I think you might be able to filter them. I will just cross-check if a filter works. Again, a filter isn't great because it's not necessarily going to give us exactly what we want. We would rather it's tied to the object itself so that every view shows the color. But if I say the ceiling's type name equals to apartment, or apartment 3 meters, I could say contains if there's different types of apartments. I'll just try overriding it with a filter. And in this case, it's the cut pattern that we really want to override. Yeah, so we could do it that way. So if you did set one up for each apartment, you could essentially create blocking and stacking diagrams. I know a lot of firms use this for hospital planning because the blocking and stacking is very important when you're working with a hospital. But this is probably my preferred method in most cases for really early space planning and area scheduling. Obviously, everything I've shown you can be built into a template or copied across to new projects, for example, this schedule. So I do recommend establishing a common format that you use and then applying that to projects as you work. So hopefully that's been useful and given you a lot of different techniques you can explore. So there we have it. Quite a long video, so if you did persevere to the end, well done. I hope that there were some handy techniques in there for you that help you be more efficient and quick when you're doing feasibility studies, which I know need to be done very fast typically, and Revit's not known for being that fast. I think the ceiling and grouping technique is the one that's worked the best for me in the past, but it is worth setting up your own template that has a lot of these things available from the start, such as a pre-formatted area schedule and all the common types you might use to plan out a building. Obviously each project is different, so you're going to need to modify some of those floors, or ceilings I should say, to generate different heights and apartments, and you might want to modify materials, filters, etc. But if you have a really common way of working in your company on the same projects, for example residential towers, this can be a very quick and efficient way of whipping up a whole bunch of options when you're planning. Anyway, if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so, and I look forward to seeing you in future similar videos. Thanks, take care.